The cold that night didn't just touch the skin. It slipped quietly into the bones, the kind of cold that made people walk faster and think less. Christmas lights hung across the street, blinking on and off like they were exhausted from pretending to be cheerful. Mark Reynolds had already shut down his computer, pulled on his coat, and was halfway through locking the office door when a small voice pierced the silence. "Sir, can you tell Santa we moved?" The words were soft, almost careful, but they landed like a sudden stop in time. Mark's hand froze on the key. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it. He turned slowly, expecting maybe a prank, maybe a passerby. Instead, he saw a little boy standing just a few feet away. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. His jacket looked one size too small, the zipper half broken. His sneakers were worn down at the soles, and his hands were stuffed deep into his pockets like he was trying to keep the cold from finding him. Beside him stood a woman whose shoulders sagged under a weight far heavier than winter. Tired eyes, tight lips, and the kind of posture that came from holding herself together every single day. Mark recognized her instantly. Lena, one of his employees. A single mother. Quiet, reliable, always early, always thankful for overtime. Never the type to cause trouble or ask for favors. The kind of worker managers counted on and rarely truly saw. Mark swallowed and cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said gently, unsure if he'd heard correctly. What did you say? The boy stepped closer, holding out a crumpled piece of paper like it was something important. Because to him, it was, "We moved last week," he explained seriously. "I don't want Santa to go to the old place and think we disappeared." Lena's face lost what little color it had left. "Ethan's sweetheart," she started, her voice tight with embarrassment and worry. But the boy didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Mark, wide and honest in a way adults forget how to be. "I know grown-ups don't believe in Santa," he said quietly, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "But just in case, I didn't want him to miss us." The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Mark felt something heavy press against his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt, surprise, shame, all tangled together. He looked at Lena again, really looked this time, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the way she stood slightly in front of her son, as if her body alone could shield him from disappointment. Mark bent down slowly, so he was at eye level with Ethan. The cold bit at his knees, but he didn't care. "Hey," he said softly, forcing a smile. "Santa's pretty good at finding people." Ethan nodded, relieved, but still serious. "That's what I thought. I just wanted to be safe." Mark took the crumpled paper from the boy's hand. It wasn't an address. It was a drawing, an apartment building, a small tree in the window, and a bright star floating above it. As Mark stood back up, the office lights shut off behind him automatically, leaving the three of them standing under flickering Christmas lights. And in that moment, Mark realized something uncomfortable and undeniable. Somewhere along the way, he had been so busy running a business that he'd forgotten to see the people who kept it alive. Mark Reynolds was successful by every measure people like to talk about. He had the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a steady holiday bonus that landed in his account every December like clockwork, and dinner reservations at places where you had to book weeks in advance just to get a table. His life ran on schedules, numbers, and performance reports, and most days that felt like enough. But standing there in the freezing parking lot, his breath fogging the air, something felt off. For the first time in years, Mark realized how little he actually knew about the people who worked for him. Not their productivity, not their attendance, their lives. Lena had never asked for help. She had never mentioned that her rent had quietly gone up while her paycheck stayed the same. Never said the landlord wanted more money for the same cracked walls and leaky pipes. She never explained why she always volunteered for overtime, even on weekends, even when her eyes looked heavy and her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. She never said her son's father had disappeared years ago, not with drama, not with anger, just gone, like a door that closed and never opened again. And Mark had never asked. He looked down at the paper in Ethan's hand again, expecting an address this time. Something practical, something he could nod at and forget later. But it wasn't an address. It was a drawing. A small apartment with a single window. A Christmas tree scribbled in green crayon, slightly crooked but carefully colored in. A yellow star floating above it, brighter than everything else on the page. Mark's throat tightened. This wasn't a note to Santa. It was a map of hope. So, Mark said slowly, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual authority. Where did you move? Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her worn-out purse. She glanced down at Ethan, then back at Mark, clearly weighing how much truth was safe to share. A smaller place, she said finally. It's temporary. Temporary. Mark had heard that word before, used in boardrooms and investment plans. But here, it meant something else entirely. It meant we're barely holding on. It meant counting dollars at the grocery store and hoping the heater lasted through winter. It meant pretending things were fine, so your child could sleep without worry. Before Mark responded, Ethan smiled, wide and confident, like he just solved a big problem. It's okay, Mom, he said proudly. Santa doesn't mind small houses. That did it. Something inside Mark cracked open. Something he'd packed away years ago beneath deadlines, profit margins, and the quiet belief that success meant distance. He felt it now, sharp and unexpected. This child wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't asking for more. He was just making sure he wasn't forgotten. Mark looked at Lena again, and this time he didn't see an employee. He saw a mother doing everything she could to keep her world from falling apart. He saw strength that had gone unnoticed, loyalty that had gone unrewarded. The cold wind swept through the parking lot, rattling the loose shopping cart nearby. Mark barely felt it. All he could think was how easy it had been to miss this, and how close he'd come to walking away like nothing mattered at all. And in that moment, Mark realized something uncomfortable but true. Success hadn't made him heartless, but it had made him blind. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He lay in his warm bed, staring at the ceiling, the house silent except for the low hum of the heater. Yet his mind was loud, too loud. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the same small, careful voice. Just in case. The words replayed again and again, softer each time but heavier with every repetition. Mark turned onto his side, then his back, then his side again. Nothing worked. The image of Ethan standing in the cold, holding that drawing like it was a lifeline, refused to leave him. Just in case Santa forgets us. Just in case we don't matter. By the time the sun rose on Christmas Eve, Mark had made a decision. He arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, almost empty, the way it always was before holidays. He sat at his desk, stared at his computer screen for a long moment, then pulled up Lena's employee file. Same position for 3 years. Same salary. No raise. No bonus. No disciplinary notes. No complaints. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. She had never once asked for more. Not even when she deserved it. Especially then. By noon, Mark canceled every meeting on his calendar. The assistants were surprised, but he didn't explain. He grabbed his coat and keys and walked out without his usual sense of urgency. That afternoon, Mark drove, but not to a mall filled with noise and last-minute panic. He went to places he hadn't stepped into since he was a kid. Small toy stores where the shelves were crowded but personal. Quiet bookshops that smell like paper and dust. Clothing stores that sold winter coats built for warmth, not fashion. He didn't buy flashy things. No electronics. No expensive brands. He bought warm things. A coat thick enough to survive winter. Boots with real grip. Gloves that actually kept the cold out. Books a child could escape into. Groceries that didn't require counting dollars. Practical things. Thoughtful things. Things that said, you're seen. As evening fell, Mark found himself parked in front of an older apartment building. The bricks were worn, the paint chipped. Only a few windows glowed with light. The hallway lights flickered, as if they were tired too. Mark stood there for a moment, heart beating faster than it ever did before a board meeting. Then he knocked. The door opened slowly. Lena froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then panic. Mr. Reynolds? Mark lifted both hands immediately, as if surrendering. I'm not here as your boss, he said gently. I promise. Before she could respond, a small face peeked out from behind her leg. Ethan, his eyes lit up. Did you tell Santa? Mark smiled, a real smile, one he hadn't practiced or forced. I didn't just tell him, he said softly. I made sure he knew exactly where to go. For a second, no one spoke. Then Ethan grinned, relief washing over his face like a victory. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She had clearly been holding back for far too long. Mark realized something in that quiet, flickering hallway. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was responsibility. And for the first time in a long time, Mark Reynolds felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, inside the apartment. The air was thin and uneven, the heater clicking weakly in the corner, like it was trying its best, but losing the fight. The warmth barely reached the center of the room. A small, real Christmas tree stood near the window. Not tall, not decorated with store-bought glitter, but alive. Handmade ornaments hung from its branches. Folded paper stars, strings of popcorn, tiny drawings tied on with thread. Each one placed with care like it mattered. Like they mattered. Mark set the bags down slowly, as if the moment itself might break if he moved too fast. These aren't from me, he said, his voice calm but steady. They're from Santa. I'm just a delivery guy. Lena pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly, tears spilling over before she could stop them. Sir, her voice cracked, the word collapsing before they could come out. Mark shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything, he said. Not explanations. Not gratitude. Nothing. Before Lena could respond, Ethan dove toward the bags with pure excitement, his fingers shaking as he pulled one open. His eyes went wide. Mom, he gasped, holding up a pair of boots. He found us. They weren't fancy. They were sturdy, warm, the kind made for real winter. Another bag held books. Stories Ethan had casually mentioned when his mom came home from work, not knowing Mark had overheard her talking about them during lunch breaks. There was a thick winter coat for Lena, still smelling new. A grocery card tucked carefully between folded paper. And finally, an envelope. Lena picked it up like it might disappear if she moved too fast. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She read the letter once. Then again, her knees gave out, and she sat down slowly on the couch. It was official. A raise. A real one. Effective immediately. At the bottom, written simply, were 4 words that hit harder than any number on a paycheck. You matter here. Lena covered her face and cried. Not the quiet, polite tears she trained herself to hide, but deep, exhausted sobs that came from years of holding everything together alone. Ethan watched for a moment, confused. Then he climbed onto Mark's lap without asking, curling in like he trusted him completely. I knew Santa was real, he whispered proudly. He just needed help. Mark let out a soft laugh that turned into a breathy exhale. His eyes burned as he blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. Sometimes, Mark said quietly, resting a hand on Ethan's back, Santa looks a lot like people who finally pay attention. The heater clicked again, struggling on, but the room felt warmer than it had all winter. The following Monday, Mark Reynolds didn't stand in front of the staff with a long speech or a motivational slideshow. He didn't talk about company culture or new visions. He changed things quietly, with actions. Salaries were reviewed, properly this time. Raises were given people who had been carrying more than their share for years. Work hours became flexible for parents who needed to be home before dinner. Doors that had once stayed closed were left open. And for the first time, real conversations replaced polite silence. People noticed, not because Mark announced it, but because life started to feel lighter. And every year after that, on Christmas Eve, Mark received a card. No return address. No fancy envelope. Just a child's handwriting. Always from Ethan. One year it said, "We're still here." Another year, "We didn't move this year." Once, written in careful, uneven letters, "I want to help people when I grow up." Mark kept every single one. They stayed in the top drawer of his desk. The same drawer that once held contracts and profit reports. Whenever the pressure of business threatened to pull him back into old habits, he opened that drawer and remembered why people mattered more than numbers. Time passed. Ethan grew taller. His voice deepened. His drawings turned into essays. His dreams became clearer. And then one evening, years later, Mark found himself sitting in the front row of a high school auditorium. Folding chairs filled the room. Parents held phones, trying to capture a moment that felt too big to fit on a screen. Ethan walked across the stage in a graduation gown, confident and smiling. Mark clapped harder than anyone. Lena sat beside him, her eyes shining, not with worry this time, but pride. As the ceremony ended and applause echoed through the room, she leaned toward Mark and spoke softly. "You know," she said, "you didn't just tell Santa where we moved." Mark looked at her, curious. "What did I do?" She smiled, her voice steady now, strong in a way it hadn't been all those years ago. "You reminded us we weren't invisible." Mark felt his throat tighten. Outside, Christmas lights had already begun to glow across the streets, warm colors against the cold night sky. Cars passed, people hurried home, and the world kept moving the way it always did. But Mark stood still for a moment, all because of one small question asked years ago in a freezing parking lot. "Sir, can you tell Santa we moved?" That question had changed the way he saw success, changed the way he saw people, changed the way he saw himself. Because sometimes, the real miracle of Christmas isn't the gift you receive. It's the moment you finally notice someone who's been standing right in front of you all along. And if the story moved you, if it reminded you to look a little closer, to listen a little more, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. This is Soulvex Studio, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Thank you for listening.